Darren Jones is here. Morning.
Hello.
Happy New Year.
And to you.
Should we just deal with that Jerry Adams thing? What's going on there?
So we inherited a policy programme from the last government that I'm told nobody in Northern Ireland liked in terms of the power sharing arrangement in the Northern Ireland executive, and parts of it had been found unlawful by the court. So we essentially had to start from scratch, and the Northern Ireland Secretary, Hilary Benn, is working with partners to develop a new scheme. This, I think, is some views being offered by members of the House of Lords, but the government hasn't yet fully published the details about how the scheme will work, and will do so in due course.
Would it not stick in your craw that Jerry Adams would get money, but Sir Alan Bates is still waiting for his?
Well, look, on the first, it'll be for the Northern Ireland Secretary to work through the detail and understand the implications of that, and I'm sure he'll present more information to Parliament in due course. In terms of the latter, you'll know I've worked on the Post Office Horizon scandal for many, many years in opposition, and the Department for Business and Trade has my full support from the Treasury to make sure the compensation scheme is moving as quickly as possible and giving the victims the compensation they need.
My question remains the same. Would it not stick in your craw that Jerry Adams might get some cash before Alan Bates?
I definitely want to make sure that victims of the Post Office Horizon scheme are compensated fairly and quickly. And as I say, the department has my full support.
You're very keen to talk about the National Wealth Fund this morning.
Yes.
Go on then.
Well, what is the National Wealth Fund? It was one of the institutions that we created coming into government to unlock private sector capital investment into our country. We know we're only really going to get growth in the economy if we can unlock investment from businesses into jobs and infrastructure across the country. And in the first 6 months of us being in office, we've raised over £1 billion of private sector money, creating thousands of jobs across the country. And that's a great start. We've got more to do, but that's the number one mission of this government, and we're going to be working with partners to continue to unlock that capital in the years ahead.
Well, you're doing a little Snoopy dance this morning when you saw the inflation figures.
A Snoopy dance?
Have you never seen a Snoopy dance?
No, can you show me?
No, absolutely not.
Was I happy? Yes. Look, inflation coming down is good news for families across the country. We know the cost of living is still a problem for lots of people. Target is 2%, it's come down at 2.5%. This is obviously much more stable than we had a few years ago, where it was kind of peaking at 11% and driving everybody to worry about their mortgage and rent and energy bills. So it's good news that inflation is coming down, shows the Prime Minister's plan for change is working in terms of stability across the economy, but we've still got more to do.
You certainly do. The pound is plummeting, borrowing costs are soaring, inflation not really behaving how you would want it to. Why isn't the budget working the way that you hoped it would?
Let's unpack that a little bit. So inflation coming down is good. Tick, that's great. It's good.
Yeah.
It's much better than it has been. And, as I say, we've
got a long way to go.
Well, it's 1, 2, 3 points above where we wanted to be. That's much better than when it was 11%, as I said last year.
Well, that was for different reasons.
But still, partly because of the government, and we're not in that situation now, and that's good news. In terms of borrowing costs, the rate at which the government pays to borrow money internationally, that has gone up in the last few days, in the same way that has in many countries, developed countries around the world.
Hence the word soaring.
Would we say soaring? It's increased for sure, and that means that borrowing is a little bit more expensive. But that's why the Chancellor's fiscal rules are so important. The first, that we don't borrow money for day-to-day spending in public services that has to be paid for by tax receipts, unlike what happened at the last government, which is why we have so much debt in the first place. And where we do borrow money, it needs to be investment into the country's infrastructure.
Disputing the pound plummeting?
And that has to fall as the size of the share of the economy. I can't give a running commentary on international kind of currency.
Just cost me a fortune while I was away against the dollar. I'm just pointing that out.
I'm sorry about that.
No, you're not. You promised to turbocharge the economy, zero growth in the economy between July and September. What are you going to do about it? Increase taxes, cut spending?
Well, our approach to growth, you'll have heard me say this before, stability, investment and reform. We've brought political and economic stability back to this country. That's welcome news. As we've already talked about with our National Wealth Fund this morning, that is already unlocking billions of pounds of money in this country that would not have happened were it not for our actions. And we're working really hard, and we've got much more to do on the reform side, whether it's on planning reform or the AI action plan the Prime Minister set out on Monday, and a whole kind of swathe of other policy areas, all underpinning our plan for change that the Prime Minister presented to the country.
We're being told that we need to give Rachel Reeves time. She's not the Manchester United manager. She's the Chancellor of the Exchequer. How much time does she need?
Well, look, there's no denying that the economy that the Chancellor of this government inherited was one of low growth, high debt and public services on their knees. I think that's why the British people voted for change at the last election. It's going to take time.
How long?
Well, it depends what the specific question is, but what I can't tell you is...
So we all feel better about our economy and our cost of living and the way that we spend our money?
Sure. Over the course of this Parliament, as we go into the next election, the whole premise of the Prime Minister's plan for change is that people will feel the difference the Labour government makes. We're all working really hard to do that. You've seen in the Prime Minister's plan for change on health, on more money in people's pockets, on more homes being available for people across the country. That's what we're working to deliver. We've been in for, 6 months now?
Longer.
Slightly longer. We've, wiped the slate clean with the budget. We've taken some difficult decisions at the start of our term in office in order to draw a line under the last government. And now we're working really hard, and this is, our first full year in government in 2025, to make sure that we're really focused on delivering the people's priorities as we set out in the plan.
So how long before we feel better about the economy?
Well, we want disposable income to increase, so people have got more money in their pocket. We want to unlock... It depends, Kate. Give me a specific example. I'll tell you.
I've just given you one. People at home this morning, when people are... the economy. So when do people feel that they've got more money in their pocket?
Well, that should be happening on a continuous basis over the coming months and years. The fact that inflation is coming down to target, well, that means that's happening now, right, Kay? Because inflation is coming down to target, which means the speed at which the cost of product is going up is slowing. And so people will already start to feel that they've got a little bit more money in their pocket. But as I said at the start, we want to do more on that. We recognise it's still a challenge for people, and that's what we'll be doing over the course of this Parliament.
Why won't Downing Street rule out an emergency budget?
Well, we only have one fiscal event a year, one budget a year under this government. There's a clear commitment from us. So that will happen in the autumn, as it did last autumn.
They're not ruling out an emergency budget?
Well, we don't need an emergency budget. What we will have is already been announced on the 26th of March. The Chancellor
So they're wrong not to rule it out?
Well, the Chancellor will give a spring statement on the 26th of March. That was confirmed before Christmas. That's when she will
So that could be an emergency budget?
Well, no, it's publishing the forecast from the Office for Budget Responsibility. So
why won't Downing Street rule it out then?
Well, we're just going to have one fiscal event in autumn and a statement in the spring, and I will publish the spending plans for public services in June.
So they're wrong not to rule it out. Yeah, that's right. Tulip Siddiq, as far as she is concerned, do you agree with the independent advisor that she says she should have been more alert to the potential reputational risks arising from her family's close ties with Bangladesh?
So the independent advisor, this independent process, is a brand new process that Keir Starmer set up coming into government because we were very clear that politicians, whether you're Prime Minister or otherwise, should not be part of this process. That's different to how it happened under the last Conservative government. And this process has been followed properly. So Tulip Siddiq referred herself to the independent advisor last week. It's moved very quickly. The independent advisor spoke to Tulip and tried to gather the facts. He was very clear in his letter that she had not breached the ministerial code. There was no improper behaviour on Tulip Siddiq's part, but because of what's been happening to her extended family in Bangladesh, as he recognised and as Tulip recognised, that has become a distraction for the government, and that's why she stood down.
You used to answer my questions when you were in opposition. My question is, should she have been more alert to the potential reputational risks arising from her family's close ties? That is what the independent advisor has decided. Do you agree with the independent advisor?
We always agree with the independent advisor, and that's his position. And to be fair, Tulip recognises in her letter where she chose to stand down from government that her family ties have become a distraction for the government. So even though she hasn't broken the ministerial code.
She has not breached the ministerial code. You're absolutely right. Given that, would she be welcome back into government at some stage in the future?
That's a question for the Prime Minister.
But would you be happy to sit around the cabinet table with her?
That's a question for the Prime Minister.
Would you be happy to sit with her?
Tulip did a great job as City Minister. She hasn't broken any rules. The Prime Minister was clear in his letter to Tulip that he would like to see a circumstance in which she can come back into government in the future. The Prime Minister appoints and sacks ministers. I'd be very happy to work with Tulip in the future if that opportunity came up, but she stood down and that was her decision. How
frustrating is it that Nigel Farage is going over to the inauguration, the presidential inauguration next week, and yet our Prime Minister, it would appear, has not been invited, unless you can tell me otherwise?
So I think it's normal, isn't it, for Prime Ministers not to go to the inauguration?
Nothing's normal when Trump's in power.
Sure. I think it's normal, though, that Prime Ministers don't go to the inauguration, but they then have a kind of bilateral state visit after they've come into office.
And they're only 1 point behind you, Reform, in the latest polls.
Well, I mean, look, we were elected with a landslide majority 6 months
Wide
ago.
but narrow.
Yeah, well, you know, landslide majority, that's how the House of Commons works. And we've got a really important plan for change for the country that we are working really hard to deliver. And on polling, I'm sure we'll talk more about that as we get to the general election in 2028-29.
Check out Snoopy Dance with the kids, they'll tell you. Good to see you. Thanks very much.